Hello.
How you doing?
I am fantastic. How
Awesome.
are you? Good?
Yeah, doing good.
Welcome to episode 14 of The Harvest, where we talk everything cinema and story, and as we grow, you grow. As we learn, you learn. My name is Xavier Garcia.
And I'm Jonathan Garcia.
Today, we are going to be talking about how to kill your darlings.
What?
That's right.
What does that mean?
Oh, man. Well, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to explain how to go through that painful process of killing your darlings in all three phases of story creation, in the writing, in the filming, in the editing. We'll discuss the self-awareness that's necessary to go through that hard and really painful process,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh, yeah.
Of self-discipline throughout the creation and creation process, and how to receive and discern what is truly constructive versus destructive criticism.
Cool. Let's do it.
Now, this is going to be a three-parter, right?
Yes.
We discuss, it's kind of
Yeah.
a really long topic.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very long topic.
Well, there's 3 different phases.
Right. And so I think it would be best if, for those of you that are watching or that are listening, this is going to be broken down into the next 3 weeks worth of podcasts. Sounds good?
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, let's get this thing started. So, first and foremost, story. Story is written 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
First, on the page with your script or your screenplay. The second time that a story is written is on set during production when it's filmed.
Yeah.
Because that's another time where the story is tweaked and changed again. And the last time that your story is rewritten is in the edit room, in the edit bay, in the edit suite.
And sometimes you'll find yourself even adjusting major points to your story within each phase.
Absolutely.
You'll be surprised how you started with an idea at first and it changed possibly drastically in the editing room.
Every time. Every phase. It's wild. And in each one of those phases, darlings are created.
Mm-hmm.
Darlings happen. Now, what are darlings? Now, I want to read, we have in our notes, we have a pretty awesome breakdown of the darlings. So I'm just going to go ahead and read that, and then we'll discuss it a little bit. And then we'll just kind of define what they mean to us. So in the writing process, darlings are words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, even chapters or whole scenes that are often our most proud moments, our most proud pieces of writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the filming process, it could be camera moves, blocking, props, or setups that you planned and plotted out and are totally in love with. Those can become darlings.
Lighting.
Yeah, lighting
techniques.
plots. Yep. And finally, in the edit process, it's shots or takes that fit beautifully into the narrative workflow, or perhaps it's like B-roll footage that's just magnificently filmed, or sometimes even for animators. Sometimes animators in the background, they'll have animations that they spent hours on, and those things can become darlings.
Yeah,
those things can become
may not even
things
have
that are near
anything to
and
do
dear.
with loving it because it's beautiful, but more so much time and effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so those can become darlings. It's things that we love to the point that we almost don't care if they're clear to our audience or not, because we love them. They're our darlings, and we want to keep them. The problem is that they can become distractions or even just unnecessary weights or burdens in our story, and these things must be killed. So let's talk about darlings a little bit, just kind of on a general identifying them and like our definition of them, and break that down a little bit more, and then we can talk about how they poke up into the writing process. So just in general, something that I found, I'm going to work backwards from the editing perspective and work backwards to writing. Sometimes in editing, I found, like when we talk, even in animation, you just brought up a really great example. In animation, animators take so much time. Even in VFX, like set extensions, you take so much time in the details of everything and how the world has to work together creatively, visually, architecturally, texturally, color, lighting, all of it. And then all of a sudden you look and your first reaction is, I worked so hard on that, it needs to be seen, so blast it with light.
Right.
But it's like, no, this is a night scene. So even though you created that entire village, we're going to put it in the dark. Right? We had to do that with a blood throne. And you worked so hard, and oftentimes, even in animation, animators will push back with, like a DP that comes in to consult.
Consciously or subconsciously?
Yeah, they'll push back because I worked on that for so long. There's no way that that's going to be played in shadow, and those can become darlings in the edit process. Things that you work so hard on, especially even a director, a scene that they realize they worked really hard on. The actors finally broke through, and then you're sitting back and you're watching it, and you're just like, yeah, but this other take narratively flows better. Like, can you step back and kill that, or can you kill that whole scene if it doesn't make sense? That kind of stuff. Those are darlings in the edit process.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's very common for animators to have spent so much time, and they find themselves arguing or really pushing and advocating for content. They may, like I said, consciously or subconsciously, I know that in the past you're just like, you're pushing something. It's like, why am I pushing this so much? And it may, you don't, until you step back and look at the whole picture, you realize it doesn't go along with the story. Is it best telling the story? And then there's so many reasons why these darlings need to be killed.
Yeah.
And so,
even as a director, looking at a narrative workflow or looking at a narrative film, and you've directed a couple of actors, right? And you're watching the take, and you've got a really complex camera move. In take one, you've got this really complex camera move. It's a oneer. And in this oneer, you've got these rehearsed actors that are going, at it emotionally, just hitting their emotional peaks, and it's beautiful. But the camera move on your first take just wasn't good. But the reaction, the raw emotion of them was great. And, and as a director, you're like, well, I worked really hard in getting them to that emotional state. This is the one that we need to take. And then, the editor's looking back and you're like, but visually, this camera move just didn't work. That can become a darling. It can be something that you stick, you're just kind of fighting for, but doesn't need to be there. And you have to be able to know when to kind of pull back and see what best works for the story that's being told.
Right, and I think that's one thing that's hard for a director. You're raising a child. How do you raise this child without infusing your desires into it? And not thinking, well, what is the child's skill sets? What is the child going to achieve for everyone else? What is the child going to grow up to be within himself? Sometimes you're like, oh, I want to see this in my child. Like, for instance, I know that my son loves to play golf. He sees me swinging the clubs.
Oh yeah.
And he picks up that club and he's hacking away at the grass. And I'm like, is he going to learn how to golf? And I'm pushing. It's like, no, he has to learn this, and this. But then I see him running and I see him sprinting, and I'm like, oh, maybe he'll be a track runner like me. And so you have to find a way where in your script you are able to tell the story that it needs to tell, not being stuck with the passions and the elements that you want to add to the story that are just satisfying yourself and not the viewer.
Absolutely. So I'm glad you brought it to the writing process, because there are these three different phases where film is affected, where film is written and rewritten, and we just talked about the edit. We kind of skipped over the filming, the production part, but let's just go right to the writing, because the writing is kind of where we're going to focus on today.
Yeah.
The writing process is foundational to the story that's being filmed.
Yeah.
It's the blueprint, it's the Bible, it's the DNA, right? It's those three different things. And I say those three different things very specifically. The blueprint, because it's the technical aspect of the movie.
Right.
It's the shot list, it's the positioning of the people, it's the blocking, it's physically the thing that's being created, that the script represents that physical thing being created. The Bible, because it's like the life force behind the movie. Yeah, it's the world, it's the themes, it's the lessons being told, it's how this piece that you're creating is going to affect culture and influence,
the languages, the religions, the philosophy.
That's what the script is going to affect. And then ultimately the DNA, the script is the DNA, because it's the identity of the movie. It's the traits, it's the features of it. It's it's what
we follow. Yeah.
Right. And so it's all three of those things. And when you have a bad script, And all three of those things are affected in your story, and therefore it makes it so much harder for a DP or for an editor or a director to do their job. It makes it so much more difficult. Oh, and in order for that to happen, it's like the DP, the editor, they almost have to make up for the weaknesses that are in the script. And that happens all the time. It happens in Hollywood. It happens in indie films. You know, sometimes you watch a movie and you're like, why was this so bad? It has such a great name director. And you start to like deduce it down to the writing. It was just a bad script. It was a bad story. And not only just a bad story, but it was a bad story being told. And that could often be because maybe there were a lot of darlings in that and nobody was willing to, you know, let ego die.
Yeah.
And all of this stuff just kind of got put in there and poured into there. Sometimes it's just a matter of just a bad call. You know, execs just make a bad call on what the audience is going to like. But oftentimes it could just be the creatives, too many, you know, like too many chiefs, not enough Indians, you know, like just too many cooks in the kitchen and not enough sous chefs. It's just there was just too much ego into it, too many darlings, and too much of it that was just convoluting the overall story, the DNA, the blueprint, and the Bible aspect of this script that's been written.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's spot on. You find yourself sometimes, you know, with us when we're in the script process. You have all your cards. You know, you know the number. How many cards usually on 3 acts?
60 to 75.
Right, 60 to 75 cards. You'll find yourself you have 200 cards extra that you've gotten rid of in your own script because you realize, wait a minute, these are amazing, but you know, how is this story strong? Yeah. Because you have to find and think of ways to even eliminate these things. You can't just, you know, because you'll end up finding yourself like you'll remove something and then you realize later on in your script process, you might not realize right away why you removed it, but as you build your story, you'll be like, that's why. The question is, how do you find that out sooner?
Yeah, well, okay, so just to give everyone kind of like an understanding of our writing process, when we first began writing, all of you already know, those of you that have been watching all of our episodes, you know that we're huge about research and about preparation and about, you know, just kind of coming in with like a plan to the writing. And a part of that we've always done is the note card process, the index card on the board process. So we will, you know, we'll plan out and plot out our story depending on the type of story that we're writing. Sometimes, you know, we'll write it in 3 acts. Sometimes we'll write it in 5. Sometimes we'll write it in 4. We don't stick to a very specific story structure. You know, it's not like, we're going to do the McKee story structure versus the Hughes story structure versus
I think over time we've definitely
Field story structure. I think that as we have developed as writers, we have found that every story requires a unique approach. But what we will do with every single one of them is that we'll plot it out. And we know that there are certain elements to story that just have to be there despite like structure rules, right? You're gonna need an inciting incident, something that initiates the action for your hero and your protagonist. You need a midway point. There's always a midway point because a movie, no matter how long it is, will have a midway point. And at that midway point, you know, something major happens. And so through all these our phases of production, you know, whether it's the midway point or the 3rd act, you know, or the 5th act, whatever it may be, these are kind of like little islands along our story, and we have these islands, and we know that we have to fill the land in between in order to make a full country, you know, like a full story. And so what we do is we have our index cards that go across, just kind of highlighting these major beats and these major scenes all the way until we get through and we have, you know, at the end of our board, our entire movie. Now, in the creation of that, which is anywhere between 60 and 75 cards or so, we end up with like anywhere between 500 cards. I think even for voice, we had like, I don't even know how many cards. And those are all different scenes, different moments, you know, different beats that are just like amazing. You know, and we think they're all amazing because they all come from a place of inspiration. But then as we start to whittle it down and cut it back, we realize, this card, we no longer need that. Which means, this entire sequence is now dead. We no longer need that. And you're cutting it to get to the raw essence of your story. And once we've got our, our 60 cards or whatever it is that tell our story, we take that and we bring that into screenwriting software, whether it's Highland or we're using Final Draft or Casuality, which we've used in the past. And there we kind of then bring it into our beats and we start to create our beat board, and then we start to write once we've outlined that whole thing. But in that process, I think something that works for us, which might help the darling killing process, is that as you're creating story, you've gone through so many phases. You've broken it down that before you're even typing, you've done a ton of collaborative darling killing. You've gone on your darling hunts with your writing partner, with friends, with people that you're pitching the story to, and you've gone through and you've destroyed these things. Yeah. And sometimes you'll end up, you've got like this stack of cards like this, and all of these are just like, it's like a morgue of scenes, of dead darlings that you could go back to.
Right.
Sometimes you bring them back, which is what you were saying.
Right. And I think to go back to that point of ways to remove it. One of the first ways that you and I do it, and we can't stress it enough, is the Bible sequence of things. When you're creating a show Bible or a movie Bible and you're creating your world, half the time, all you have to go to is that to find out whether your darling makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, people may not know, yes, we do create even a Bible for our films. And some people think that's a little bit over the top and maybe too much. It's like, a show Bible for a series. Obviously, yes, we get it. That thing has to live for 10 years. But we also do it for a film. I don't know, maybe...
Because a lot of times our films aren't, a one-time thing. We perceive it with the potential of being a part 2 or part 3.
Well, it's helped us because we've created all these shorts that have these Bibles, and now we're turning them into features. And now as we're educating our crew and our cast, which oftentimes in indie films, sometimes they're volunteers. Yeah. Check out our volunteers episode. Yeah. They are able to pick up that Bible, and they're able to look at this and be like, I know your whole world. Right. I know everything that you're trying to create.
That's awesome. And because
it works for us.
It's at that point, our actors would look at our Bible and then they would be reading our script and they'd be like, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't go along with the character you created. And it's like, awesome. Happened. That's great. Yeah. That's what we want. We want to be able to find all the road bumps and smooth out the script so that we're able to find everything that just doesn't make sense, so that later on some reviewer or some person is saying, there's a plot hole here, or this doesn't make sense, or this character got thrown off. Or for instance, I know that one of the shows that you and I enjoyed watching was The Office. Oh, yeah. And the first 3 episodes, or should I say the first season, is completely different than seasons 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and on. And there was a major shift. There was a major change, and they had to do it because of audience purposes. They had to do it because it just didn't connect with their audience. Yeah. And sometimes, you end up finding that you're killing darlings because for a show series is because you have to, attract your audience or attract your viewers. You have to find a way. Oh, my story is this, or my character is this way, or my shot style is this way, or my lighting is this way. I have to change all that because. So it's not just particular story, but it could be executives who want to pursue a target audience, and so many other reasons why.
And that happens a lot in TV, but it actually, people don't know, it actually happens in film as well. Oftentimes, the writer is still on set writing as the movie is being shot, or the director himself is rewriting things, prior to the shooting, or even during production. What happens during production is that certain things grow. Production is such a living organism with so many people involved and inputting into the process that things change. No matter how planned you may be, no matter how specific, and no matter how authoritarian you are about the fact that it needs to happen this way, things just don't go this way every time. Production, it grows, it evolves, it changes. Remember with A Blood Throne, there was an entire scene in A Blood Throne that we were planning to be a oneer. It was supposed to be the scene
Oh, right,
inside
yeah.
the prior to the death of King Herod.
Yeah.
All of that scene prior to the death of King Herod was supposed to be one giant oneer, and it was supposed to last, I think, like a 5-minute oneer. And it was rehearsed, it was plotted, it was to the T. We had it, we knew what we wanted to do, and then when we got into this space and we finally built the pool, because we had like a 3 feet water pool that we had to build inside the space, and we looked at the dimensions and we felt what it was to do the oneer, we had to change.
Yeah.
It had to grow. And no matter how like anal we were about the fact that it needs to be this way,
Yeah.
it had to change.
Yeah.
It had to. And so with that change, there was changing in the writing.
Right.
There was changing in the story. And it all affected. And our darling of the oneer had to be killed.
Right, because when you think about it, your camera is only pointing in one direction at a time. And when you're cutting and you're doing something else other than a oneer, you can have multiple moments of cutting to different people talking. So that affects the script greatly. The script will have a whole bunch of action and then a little dialogue, a whole bunch of action, little dialogue. Whereas now you have to have dialogue, action, dialogue, action, dialogue, action. And so, that adds time, that adds, money, and so it's a lot to think about, and it's a lot that you have to go at it early on.
Yeah.
You have to attack earlier on. I know that there are so many examples of oneers being killed. For instance, sometimes oneers being killed brings out better oneers.
Better ideas,
better
yeah.
darlings. Better darlings, I should be oneers.
Darlings being killed bring on better moments.
Exactly.
And better,
yeah, like for instance, I think of Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones.
Yep.
He's
got the sword
exactly.
and he's going like this, and he's
can I
supposed
just
to be
shoot the guy?
Yeah, it's supposed to be an elaborate sword fighting scene, but he's exhausted from
that
production.
must have been like the director was like, no, I want to have an awesome fighting scene here, and he's like, no, let's
I'm
just
tired. Can we just shoot
exactly?
this guy?
And
I got a gun in my pocket.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and it's one of the most memorable, indelible moments of that
Yeah.
movie and
Yeah.
all that franchise and of like movie history. Just like this guy going, "Rah, rah, 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 rah," and then just him.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's not always a negative.
No.
It opens up the opportunity for you
Well,
to
it always
think of new ideas.
killing darlings always makes the story better.
Right, that's the
always.
point.
It will always. And if you're operating with that kind of mentality
Yeah.
and you're thinking, okay, look, I got to let my ego die a little bit because
Yeah.
I know it's going to be better through the collaborative process, it will get better, then you will be making better art. You'll be telling better stories. I know even like for myself, like as a writer, here's how you identify a darling. If you've written a piece and you've given it to a friend, someone that you trust to read it, and they say, I didn't get this, get rid of this, and you're like, you just want to like grab them by the throat,
Yeah.
like, well, you're not smart, that's why you didn't get it,
Right.
The moment that you start to feel that way, and the person's being genuine, they're like, look, I need help understanding this, and if you feel that bubbling up inside, that's probably
and,
darling.
And you have to be careful that, for instance, if I'm feeling this way, I can't expect them to give me something better. Or you can expect them to for instance, critique it well to me. If it doesn't come clear in story of what needs to be done, sometimes there's mystery movies that you pursue something with vague and approach for story purposes, which you have to be careful of. You're not just saying no, I have to accept his critique and remove it because that's the whole point of the story. But then there are times where someone's reading and they have no idea what's going on, and you have to be mindful that let's hear it all, and I'm going to help you clarify what you need to say to me on why this needs to be removed. So you have to work with people when they're trying to help you remove a darling.
Yeah, and so it has to be a collaborative process in order to identify them. It is it takes a village type of mentality in order to raise this story, raise this child, and which is often why, as we were saying earlier, even throughout the production process, there's still writing that's involved. And that's I can't stress enough the importance of approaching the writing process as a craftsman would approach his craft. You know, sometimes people, especially in the independent film world, and it happens a lot in Boston in the indie film world, is that, you know, somebody just like, well, I'm a screenwriter, I write, you know, like I write poetry, so I'll write a movie, and then they'll go and they'll write this movie, and it's just this like long like thing full of emotions and just desires and just things that cannot be, you know, actually seen, and these things try to be filmed, and then you get on set, and now the director has to be rewriting things and rechanging things and readjusting things. Like having that mentality that the script and the script writing process and the script writer is a craftsman, and you need to know your tools, and you need to understand the function, and you need to understand story structure, and not that there are rules in screenwriting, because here's how it works. There are rules, okay? There are rules. There are things that you need to understand about the screenwriting process, about how to write effectively, efficiently, how to write elegantly, how to write concisely, how to show, you know, and not tell. All of those things. I mean, those are all essentially rules. What is an inciting incident? You know, what is that climax, that falling action? How to continuously pump conflict and how to plot. Those things are all connected to rules. But just like any solid craftsman, like a carpenter, for example, the moment that you understand your tool, your hammer, how to use your hammer. A hammer is for banging. And once you've mastered that, then you start to use your hammer for all sorts of random things. You can wedge something up. You can pry something out. You know, the hammer just becomes a tool for so many things. So you break the rules of the hammer. You break the rules of, you know, of screenwriting, but it's not because you're just breaking them for the sake of breaking them. You're understanding what rule you're breaking, why you're breaking it, and how you're now using that tool for something else that is helping you tell the story, right? And that's so important, because when you take screenwriting from that perspective, you're now not just creating these fantastic darlings because they're wonderful
poetic,
and they're beautiful and they're poetic. No, it's like you're creating things that are effective, that are efficient, and that are purposeful for the story, for the moving forward of your protagonist and getting him from point A to point B. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Super important. Now, something that, you know, a real quick note that I did want to address. Like, there are elements to screenwriting, you know, Aristotle's Poetics, you know, that's important to understand. It's important to read it. It's important to know it. It's a small little pamphlet, you know, it's not a big book, but you got to understand that and understand what the first person to analyze and break down story and story structure, what he was saying about it. Because it's actually, even for that era, it's actually pretty solid, and it still kind of holds true. Now, yes, some things have kind of fallen through. He didn't have a full and thorough understanding of the human mind and the human psychology and how it works as we do today. You know, at the end of the day, I think Aristotle says a story is for the purpose of catharsis. Well, you know, in that area, I slightly disagree. Nevertheless, everything that he has written as far as structure for a comedy and a tragedy holds even to this day. And so you need to know that stuff, and you need to study it. In the process of learning, in the process of growing and understanding your craft, darlings are created. They're inevitable. They will happen. And darlings, the way that I like to define it, and I'm just going to read it straight from my notes, are that piece of writing that spawns from a space that lies between deep emotion and subconscious personal desires. And knowing when to kill them is knowing when the writing goes from giving to the audience versus taking from the audience. Right. When you want to give them a reaction versus wanting to get a reaction from them. And there's a huge difference there. That's major. Like, you want to offer them the story versus you want to get from them some sort of a response to something that you have written. And when you're thinking from the wanting to take, darlings are created that oftentimes aren't necessary and antagonize your reader and your viewer. And they're like, I don't get this. What are you trying to get out of me? You know, versus you know, the famous example, I think the famous example, which I'm going to revert to, is Michael Jr. Michael Jr., the comedian. He's a Christian comedian, and he has a special where he talks about the day that he shifted in his story writing process was the day he actually became successful. He went from trying to get laughs out of the audience by telling jokes to trying to put in laughter, to trying to put in joy, trying to put in a happiness into them with what he was saying. And the moment that he had this subtle shift in his psychology as to his work process, everything changed for him.
Yeah.
His storytelling increased in value. It increased in its power. And we as storytellers, whether it's through writing or through production or through editing or through poetry or dancing, the moment that we go from trying to get and take, receive, to trying to give and give and give, that's when we become better givers of story.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. Sometimes you'll find yourself watching a movie, and then you can quickly pick out some sort of agenda or some sort of propaganda.
Like, what are they trying to get out of me?
Yeah, and it just makes you not want to watch it, or just kind of makes you just uncomfortable. And that's, people can pick that out anywhere. I think there was a really cool moment where the Russo brothers gave a moment to the audience instead of taking. I think one of the coolest moments I know, especially in Avengers Endgame, was the moment that Captain America got the hammer. You know, he was able to pull it out, and that gave everyone, and when everyone writes about it, everyone talks about it, it's because it just gave to the audience something that they've been wanting. It was an Easter egg they've been desiring for a long time. And they wrote it to give to the audience, not to take. There was nothing in return. It was a complete reward for waiting that long and being like, here you go, the last movie, here's your reward. And it nailed what it's supposed to be like.
So here's a funny story. You guys remember when we went to go see it? I think it was after a film festival. I think it was after we had all gone together to a film festival. And we were all together. It was the whole cast and crew of Underground, was it? No,
A Blood Throne.
Yeah. And there was one movie theater that was open that night, and the only movie that was showing was Endgame.
Yeah.
And everyone had seen it except for me.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, all right, we'll go for you, Xavier, because it's so good, because you guys wanted to see, you know, how I received it.
Right.
And
Your reward.
And I remember when we were watching that battle scene, I remember just focused, and then all of a sudden I see all of you guys turn to me, and you're all looking at me, and I'm like, why are they looking at me? And then all of a sudden he goes, whoom, and I'm like, ah!
Yeah, it gives you chills.
Yeah, I was like,
That's
ah,
good writing.
you guys were looking to see how I would receive it, because you all experienced how the Russo brothers gave that to you, and you guys got joy from seeing me receive it.
It was a gift given to you that we enjoyed.
Yeah, and you know what? But in that same movie, interestingly enough, there's a moment where the Russo brothers tried to take. Mm-hmm. And that's the moment where you could see there was an agenda where they had all of the women, you know, they were trying to appeal to kind of like what's happening right now in gender politics in the United States. There's a strong push for equality across the board, which is great. I understand, like, okay, yeah, we need to see more females in directors' positions, hands down. Catherine Bigelow. What would the world be like without her, you know, and seeing some of her work, hands down, absolutely. But when you try to take and you're forcing something for the sake of like trying to get from the audience, like I think it's the moment that Captain Marvel, you know, she has the Infinity Gauntlet in her hand, and, you know, and she's about to, like, you know, I don't know what it is, or she's about to deliver it. I can't remember now. I'm like blanking out. But it's that moment where all of the women are like, we've got your back. I've got your back. Together we're going to do it. And I was like, Captain Marvel just flew through a plane, you know, like she just wrecked a house by herself. She doesn't need, you know, but it was like, I got it. I was just like, at that moment, I was like, I see what you're doing. You're trying to like pull from me my support because you understand like gender politics and what's happening. You're trying to get this out of me. And I was like, cheesy, you know, come on. You know what I mean? Right. You didn't need to do that just to pander, you know, to like that specific demographic. It's like, I get what you're doing.
It's better when it's like more authentic, when it's clear.
It wasn't authentic. It wasn't honest. You could tell that they were doing it at that moment with an agenda. Yeah. And like I said, like it's not that I'm in disagreement of what like the idea behind it, but the fact that they were trying to take it
well, it's
from
a
me.
flow. It's a flow in
Yeah.
story. It's one of those moments where you want to keep the audience engaged, and the moment that you basically do a little pit stop, the weight can hurt it.
Yeah.
And so that's really what it is. It's like you're sitting there waiting for the next ride, and you get lost in the moment, and you get yourself separated from that momentum, from that storyline where you get back on as the movie continues on, but you'll just continue to be thinking and thinking and thinking about that.
Yeah, and it's just it's funny that we found two great moments in the same exact film, but yeah, that happens, and you got to be fair and you got to be honest. Look, like you said already, the audience can pick it up like that. Mm-hmm. They'll know the moment that they're being taken advantage of or something's being taken from them, mm-hmm. which is oftentimes the problem with a lot of even faith-based cinema. Mm-hmm. Like they're just trying to take and get approval from the audience, and they're pulling from you and then taking it away from, as opposed to just giving you a beautiful story like that which you are already wanting. Mm-hmm. That's like the servant's approach, like a great servant leader who's giving and because they love their audience and they love those that are coming to receive the message, they're giving and not insecurely writing in order to get approval, in order to get acceptance, in order to get followers. Like that's the problem in the darling creating story. And sometimes the wanting to get comes from a place of our own personal emotion, our own agenda, our own desire. And we create these things that we think are awesome, and when someone tells us like you kind of lost me in the story here, we become defensive about it.
Yeah, and there's always a way to tell something. Of course, and I think that for the individual who's really stuck with their darling, you bring it up to a friend, a co-writer, or another production, a professional, a filmmaker, and you present it, and you'll find it's 9 times out of 10 that they'll be able to relate your darling without having to take, and doing it in the form of giving. So that it's more tasteful, and they're able to continue in the story. Yeah.
Now, Hans gave me a pretty awesome example as I was going through these notes with Hans. He gave me, I call it the Hans theory, right? This is what he said. He says, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich plus tuna does not equate fine dining, is what he said. Yeah. If you've got a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and you add tuna, that doesn't equal fine dining. And that goes back to the auteur theory, where sometimes, as directors or even DPs or writers, we want to be this artistic, and we create this beautiful peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. We say we're going to be different and we're going to add tuna because nobody's added tuna before to a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And that's going to elevate our art because somebody is going to take that and have a refined palate and be able to discern the fact that this in fact is fine dining. It's not. It's you trying to get from the audience a reaction about you as an innovator in the art of making sandwiches, and that's just not true. Like don't add tuna to a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If you want to add something, maybe add fluff. Maybe that makes it different. Okay, so fluff, peanut butter and jelly, maybe at that point you are creating something that's unique that works better together. But tuna, come on.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So I just thought that was interesting in the fact that oftentimes there is that desire to be different, to be unique, which also creates darlings. When you're trying to be something above and beyond, and you want to be different for the sake of being different, oftentimes we create darlings into our writing that just become tuna. And you're just like, oh, like why is this inside this peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Like, get rid of this. This doesn't even fit. I get the fact that you want to be an artist and be different, but don't throw tuna at me when I'm eating something sweet. And so, identifying those problems in bad scripts that are usually commonplace. These things are often commonplace in the film Hollywood industry, but they also happen in the independent film world. Now,
one thing I wanted to say is a lot of times you'll find people who are in the industry that have a cult following. And a lot of times you'll see that why their movie's so long is because their darlings are in it.
Yeah.
And
I'm so glad you went there.
And, you know, you have to realize, well, they have a cult following and people love
okay,
their
so
darlings.
if you're Tarantino,
Right.
you're a Scorsese, or your last name is is a French last name, then you can get away with that.
Yeah.
You can get away with like the 3-hour and 30-minute, biopic gangster movie, but they've got their darlings in there,
Right, and they have a following that people are like, I want that poetic form that you speak in, you know.
Yeah.
So you got to build your way up there, and maybe there's some darlings that you do leave throughout your filmmaking career, so that you can establish yourself differently from everyone else. But you also have to remember, like we always say, you and I, that story is king. And if you lose people in your story with you trying to be poetic and artistic, people will quickly spot it, and you will lose people more than you'll gain.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Look, you got to get to the point where you have built, and again, if you're doing this for commercial success, if you're doing this as like, your 9 to 5, this is your living, you're a filmmaker, well, you need to earn the audience's desire for your darlings, because Scorsese, when he puts his darling into a film, it's probably going to be like Al Pacino or, like doing some wild moment, I tell you, like just something crazy.
Yeah, something that's
and
never
you're like, that
again.
was awesome.
Yeah.
And it was a darling, and it didn't need to be in there. It could have totally been cut out. But because it's Scorsese directing this amazing actor, you just want to see it.
Yeah, it kind of becomes an art piece.
Yeah.
It really does. It kind of becomes an art piece that you don't want to cut out because, you want to make it available to the world,
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got to work your way to that.
Right.
And that's now like your voice.
Yeah.
And that is very synonymous to voice.
That's when you become a museum piece.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's what a lot of his films are. Taxi Driver has a lot of those things in there. And work all your way down to like just most recently The Irishman. It's a ton of darlings in The Irishman, but you just can't help but watch, just like, wow. Like you can see the command that he has, the art, the museum pieces that are there, and it's a bunch of people that are at the apex of their careers coming together to make something, and so for us indie filmmakers, we got to earn those stripes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, interestingly enough, I'm glad that you brought there, because screenwriting is about being economical. It's about being simple, but instead of saying simple, I like to say, just like Craig Mazin, I like to say elegant. It is about writing elegantly. It's about being lean and being very specific, right? It's about showing, not telling.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And because that's film, and we're talking about film and TV, both TV and feature narrative. It's a visual medium.
Yeah. But sometimes you got to be careful that you don't fall in the trap of just showing and then being like, what am I seeing? Like slow motion shots of flowers falling.
Yeah.
Like what's going on? It just looks elegant and beautiful. Yeah. What's the point of that?
And that goes back to the writing.
Yeah.
Like did the writing, and if you've got like a 300-page script, and it's because there's a section that, there's an entire 10 pages just like explaining the dew that mists over the rolling hills as the sun comes up and the rays cut through the mist, and you're looking at a droplet and you're like, okay, am I gonna film that? Like, is that essential to the story? Am I going to now zoom my camera in on this, hibiscus flower with a droplet of, dripping down? Like, what does that do for the story? It's like, yeah, but it's so beautiful writing, and it's elegant, and the words that I used. I mean, I was pouring into a thesaurus as I this verbal diarrhea poured forth from my lips. Okay, guy,
exactly
that is a lot of darling that needs to be cut. Yeah. You have 90 pages to 100 pages to write this story and to get it across. And, it's scientifically proven that human beings have a very, very, very short attention span. Yep. And if you're trying to convey a message and you're trying to hold them for that message, you only have so long to do that. And it's connected to, a lot of other things that happen physiologically, biologically, like our bladders. Yeah, like over the course of time, we as human beings have been created to be able to be put in a specific place for a specific amount of time, and then we have to get up to use the bathroom. Like it's just normal things that are built into our psyche and our psychology and our human nature and who we are. So don't have someone sit in a theater for 3.5 hours watching raindrops. Like it just like it doesn't work. Don't do it
unless the character is on drugs or something.
Oh, well, yeah, then now that's the purpose, because that's a part of the
Right.
story. There's this psychedelic thing that they need to, that you're telling the audience, look at how they're, okay, prime example, Bradley Cooper in Limitless.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of that, like, zooming in, special effect, 3D, like, focusing on what's happening in the background, a lot of that B-roll, but that's because it's telling the story. Right? It's not Darlings, it's telling the story.
Right. So you have to, it's not so much that we're just saying get rid of things that are artistic and beautiful, but get rid of things that look beautiful to you but say nothing to the audience and understanding the story.
And a lot of accomplished writers tend to have an issue writing screenplays because they can't translate their own work. Mm-hmm. This happens a lot when, those that go with prose, that are, prose writers that are writing then screenplays. Obviously the most famous example is F. Scott Fitzgerald. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby. Mm-hmm. And he's famous for having written that, but then, accomplished, prolific writer, moves to Hollywood, goes to write screenplays and just can't. He wrote like an iteration of Gone with the Wind that never saw the light of day. He wrote Madame Curie, he wrote Winter Carnival, he wrote all of these films that are now like just these screenplays that no one's ever seen. But how does the writer of The Great Gatsby, amongst a whole bunch of other works, not be able to write a movie? There's a discipline. There's a craft. Mm-hmm. There are things that you need to do. There's the discipline of restraint and understanding how to write what is seen efficiently.
Right.
And then and again, we're talking about the writing portion of it. Next week we're going to talk about the filming portion of it, because that also applies. The restraint, that gift of restraint and knowing how to be efficient and effective. But he's a famous example. He's a very famous example. Now, that doesn't mean that there are no prose writers that have gone from writing prose into writing narrative filmmaking and have succeeded. Like, there are plenty. There are great examples. There's William Goldman. William Goldman is the best example. A writer of prose that goes on and writes Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Wins an Oscar for it, and then All the President's Men, and wins an Oscar for it. It can be done. I think Michael Crichton did it as well. And he's credited for creating the show ER. There are examples of it, but it is very difficult because it is a whole new and very unique and very specific discipline. Yeah, it is a craft that must be learned.
You're creating, you're writing for the imagination of anyone who reads it versus you're writing for an imagination of a director's perspective.
Yeah.
You're one person to show how he will show this world. Yeah. And you have to write it with the intent of knowing the world of filmmaking. Yeah. And that is it's a task.
Well, it's interesting because like when you're reading a book, you're reading prose, the author is able to give you the thoughts of your character. They're able to write that out. Mm-hmm. They're able to jump in between first, second, third person and deliver to you what this character is thinking. What are the character's motivations? What is the characteristics and the character traits? What's all these different things, about the character. But when you're writing for a script, all you can do is write to them what is seen, and therefore character development, a character trait, or, how a character thinks is determined by the character's choices, right? So you have to write the character into a corner, right? And they are forced to make a choice. Do I save the girl or do I save myself? And based on that character's choice, you then as an audience, you're able to deduce the type of character that he is. Oh, he's like, oh, he's the benevolent type. He's the type that would sacrifice himself to save the girl. Versus if he went to save himself, he's like, oh, he's the selfish type. And so whereas in prose, you could write, this man is very selfish. He only thinks about himself, blah, 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 blah. In a film, you can't do that. You can't. You can't tell. I mean, okay, you could have voiceover, sure, so it can happen. But like, you're not gonna have every single movie that you write have voiceover just in order for you to like explain what's going on in the mind of your character. It just doesn't work that way. Again, it's a visual medium, and so understanding something like that, for example, that's a tool, and understanding how that works is important for telling story efficiently and being able to remove. Again, this is all about darlings. Being able to remove your darlings from the page.
Yeah.
Now, here's an example. Building an IKEA table. Okay. Have you've built IKEA before?
Yeah.
A lot of the furniture that we have here is IKEA.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when the engineer creates the blueprint for the IKEA table, there's a lot that goes into that. He not only has to create a blueprint that explains where the leg goes, and how the screws attach, and how it turns and locks into place. But he also has to design the why, right? Mm-hmm. He has to show, before it goes to a manufacturer, or before it goes to a wholesaler, or before it goes to the IKEA, place where it's sold, he has to have, in the designing process, given the whys, the hows, the whats, the whiches, the whens, all that stuff about this product. And if you and I were to take that blueprint and try to create the table, we'd fail miserably every single time. But by the time it gets to the manufacturer, or by the time it gets to the wholesaler, or it gets to the store where they're selling it directly, when you buy it and it comes in that box, it comes with a little piece of paper, very simple instructions, very minimal pictures. Number one sentence. Sometimes they'll make a video. In order to create your new IKEA table, this is what you have to do. Now, if that isn't enough, and if you send them that engineer's blueprint, then you've got a problem. You're not going to be able to move these pieces. You're not going to be able to sell this stuff. You're not. Because who wants to sit there building a leg for 6 hours?
Right.
Just because you're telling them about the why and the reasons why this engineering part was created in such a way in order for it to function with this other piece, right? No one wants to do that, although we all have built an IKEA leg for an hour. It's just, I don't know, it just happens. Now, your story is like the IKEA table, right? It's an amalgamation of complex pieces assembled together to create your product, your movie. A film, a script, it could be a song, it could be whatever. Right now we're talking about films. So to create your product being a film. And that product needs to make sense. It needs to make sense, and all of the parts have to work together harmoniously with all of the other pieces. They have to fit together. And no one wants to spend 3 hours trying to just piece together an IKEA leg. So, in film, if your audience has to spend 30 minutes trying to understand that IKEA leg, if they're spending 30 minutes just trying to understand the character motivation or the plot structure, then the blueprint is flawed. The blueprint is flawed. It's too dense. It's overstuffed. There's probably way too many darlings in there that are like slowing them down. Now, there are examples of when this does work. And right off the bat, I'm thinking of as Inception. Tenet is about to come out, right? Christopher Nolan is notorious for creating, these blueprints that are just dense and intense.
Right.
Now, he is the master of storytelling. So he's able to create something that is super dense and super intense for you to understand. But at the same time, because he's so great at creating it, you don't have to understand any of it and you still get what's happening. You can still enjoy the story.
He uses the hammer in different ways.
Right. Now, for us that are not Christopher Nolan, when we try to create something super intense, if you've got your audience trying to understand this one set piece and 30 minutes is, they're just thinking about that, they've already lost the rest of your story. You've lost them, and nobody, because who wants to go to the cinema to work harder than they're already working in their 9 to 5?
Right. In understanding, yeah.
Like, who wants to do that? It's like, oftentimes you're going for multiple reasons. One of the biggest is to escape, to be entertained. to just just give me the entertainment. I want to escape. I want to get away from my 9 to 5. I don't want to sit here and try to engineer your story while you're just supposed to be giving it to me.
I don't want to think. I just want to enjoy. And if I'm going to think, I better have a good time thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what Christopher Nolan is able to do. He's able to show you a good time and you're thinking, because he's giving to you. He's not trying to take. He's not trying to be witty and clever in his writing. He knows he's witty and clever. He's just writing. Whereas the rest of us are just trying to look how witty and clever I am. So let me write this 30-minute piece of, whatever.
Yeah, and if I'm thinking and my brain is polluted, then I'm not going to have a good time.
I'm done. Yeah, I'm done. And The Matrix is another example of that. The Matrix is a very complicated film, right? They're going into a lot of theory about, what the blue pill versus the red pill, awoken versus asleep, these different worlds and how they interact with one another and how they're metaphors for, government and machine and blah, 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 blah. Nevertheless, you're able to watch that because at the end of the day, the way that the Wachowskis put it together, it was something that they were giving you as entertainment.
Yeah.
It's complex because their ideas are complex, but it's a giving and it's not a taking, which goes back to that.
And you're not so caught up in trying to figure it out because the protagonist has no idea either. Yeah. So you're joining him in that journey of kind of just figuring it out as we go along. And so because of that, you're following him. Right. You're not following the world of the character. Right.
Which I'm very intrigued as to what's going to happen with Tenet because there's so many articles that are coming out. Variety, even most recently, The Hollywood Reporter put out an article about how even the actors themselves didn't understand the plot and they had to go back to Christopher Nolan and hey, what does this mean? So I'm going to be very interested as to how it's going to hit audiences and theaters because look, this is going to be probably the first major film in a theater after having been quarantined for 3 months. And audiences are so fed up, with quarantine that they want to go and escape. Yeah. And if they're going to be forced to work, I wonder, I don't know. Yeah. But, hey, Christopher Nolan has done it time and time and time again, so who are we to doubt that it's going to be amazing and that people are going to love it? Nevertheless, I'm intrigued by that. Yeah. So, final topic. How do we then kill the writing darlings? How do we kill them? What would you advise?
The number one thing, and we kind of touched on it, is where do you start? Is putting your ego aside. Yeah. Because then you can listen. And when you can listen, you're able to understand why it needs to go. Yeah. I think that's number one in filmmaking. I mean, you're working with a lot of people in filmmaking. Yeah. You can't just force things unless you have a major reputation. Right. But that's really number one.
Yeah, I agree. Your ego in order to listen. My advice would be the who you're listening to, right? Surrounding yourself with creatives that are like-minded and that you trust. Trust is so important because if you trust them, then you're trusting that they are looking at, for your best interests. They're looking for the best interests of the story. And so you're able then to hear what they're saying. And because you trust them, no, I know they're telling me something because they care. They care about me. They care about the story. They care about, whether it's my career or the project that's being worked on. They really care. And so if they're saying that they don't get it or that they don't like it or that it's bad or whatever, then there's something wrong here. And although I feel like I want to strangle them, they are like-minded people that I have surrounded myself with that I know care, and therefore I have to just trust their instincts.
Yeah, and it makes it easier for you to receive, Yeah.
And so my advice would be to surround yourself with like-minded creatives that when you're done with your writing, you're able to bounce the writing off of them. Whether it's, a writing partner that you're writing with or someone that, that you've met that, cares about you, that you've written with in the past, or perhaps, you've helped them in the past type of thing. But it has to be people that you trust and that that care about you, because as they talk, you'll be able to then make those changes, kind of self-analyze.
Yeah, and 90% of the time, you already know you have to kill your darling.
Yeah. Yeah.
You probably are seeing it and you're like, I don't want to do it, but
There's a little still small voice that
keeps
says,
telling
get rid of that.
Get rid of it. It's going to make your story easier to continue, or it's hurting your story, and you're the one fighting it.
Yeah, and you're like, but I worked so hard.
Yeah. So let that friend, that companion, or whatever, be your confirmation, because it will become easier for you to let it go once you recognize.
You got to be able to identify where it is that you're being irrationally emotional about your work. You know, sometimes that's what it comes down to. We're just being emotional about something, and it's irrational. It's like,
if you are stuck in your writing and you don't know why you can't get past an area, probably is because you've inserted some sort of dialing that doesn't allow you to get over it and continue in your story.
Yeah. And so you need to check ego, surround yourself with like-minded individuals that can help you, get through those roadblocks, or maybe even just pinpoint these things out, and be able to identify when you yourself are being just like emotional and irrationally emotional about some specific piece. Cool. And then you just chop.
Yeah. Plus, you want to make things tighter, smoother.
Yeah. For all the reasons that we've already mentioned, absolutely have to make them tighter and efficient.
Cool.
Sweet. All right. Well, time for our creator's tip of the week. I always make you go first, so I'll go first this time.
Go ahead.
All right. My creator's tip of the week is actually a person. It's a contemporary photographer. His name is Todd Hiddo. Todd Hiddo is a contemporary photographer. I've got a couple of facts here. He's published about 17 books on just art and photography. And he went to the School of Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So he's he's not local. I don't know where he was born, but I know he went through schooling here. So I got to double check on where he's actually specifically from. I'm only familiar with his work, not his life story. But another cool thing is that he also went to Tufts University in Medford, which is where we are currently right now, our home base of operations. He went to Tufts. And then from Tufts, he went to RISD.
Okay. Yeah.
So, which you're familiar with a lot of the RISD professors. You've worked a lot with them. So he went to RISD, and then he got his MFA at the California College of Arts and Crafts. But what's cool about Todd Hiddo, which Roger Deacon talks about him a lot, is his ability to light exteriors and do night lighting. And if you study how he does night lighting and how he blends colors, and you just look at his work, he's got a ton of work out there. A ton of work for a contemporary photographer, and an artist. He's done a lot. And if you just study it, you'll be able to understand color theory, contrast, compositions, why you light an exterior at night a certain way, what that does with emotion, with mood. And so study his work. But I would say that for just any, for like studying photographers is a great way to studying for, understanding lighting, understanding composition, understanding storytelling in general. And for me, when I look at his work, it helps me just as a storyteller in general, just how to convey mood better. Like, oh my gosh, why do I have to write all of this in order to convey mood when I could just, it's all in the lighting, or it's all in the composition, or it's all in the contrast between light and dark and the chiaroscuro and all that good stuff. So Todd Hiddo, Toddhido, Hiddo, I will put his name in the show notes. Check him out. He's got phenomenal work.
Awesome. I will definitely check him out tonight. So mine's an app, an iPhone app, kind of in alignment with what we're talking today. The app's called Weekend Read. And it's really cool. It has a list of, from going back, I think, to 2007, of scripts.
Oh, cool.
Of Oscar-winning scripts, and a whole bunch of other types of international scripts. And it's great to just sit back, and if you want to read a script and learn how people get to the point, how they're able to clarify what they're saying, and then you watch the movie afterwards and you realize, oh, this is how they were able to articulate the scene, and how they would kind of translate what they were trying to say. It's a really good And it's a weekend read, you know, and that's the
awesome.
name of the app. It's and so it's something to, if you are serious about screenwriting, I suggest the first thing you start doing is reading scripts. Reading scripts.
Oh, yeah.
So Weekend Read, check it out on the App Store for Apple. I'm not sure if it's on.
We'll look that up. We'll put it in the show notes so that they can just click on it, and that'll appear at the bottom of the YouTube page, the YouTube video for those of you that are watching us on YouTube. For those of you that are joining us through Spotify or Apple Podcasts, all these links will be found at patreon.com/The Harvest Podcast. So if you want to go to patreon.com/The Harvest Podcast, you'll be able to catch all of our show notes and some extra behind the scenes footage. If you become a patron, you'll be able to access just some cool, goofy stuff, our workflow, kind of what we do, how we do it, that kind of thing. Right now, there's just a few videos, but it's going to continue being uploaded with more and more insight into our world and how we do things at Mount Harvest, especially now as we are working on Underground and developing the story, and pretty soon going on some scouts. We're going to be showing you some behind the scenes of the scouting process and location research. So yeah, the patron, patreon.com/The Harvest Podcast.
Cool.
But that is it for The Harvest. Thank you
right.
guys for joining us so much. This week we did our Killing the Darlings for writing. Join us next week when we will be talking about killing your darlings in the film production process. Special thanks to our show producer, Alana Despena, whom has soon, I'm hoping, will be able to merge everything that we're doing with the Patreon and also put it on the Mount Harvest website so that there's more resources for our listeners. So to support The Harvest, visit Patreon page at patreon.com/The Harvest. And for any questions that are short questions, you can reach me directly at xgarcia on Twitter.
At Jonathan Harvest.
On Twitter. And for longer questions, you can reach us at info@mountharvest.com. That's info@mountharvest.com. Thank you guys very much for joining us this week. We'll see you next week.
Yep. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.
Join us at thepatreon.com/The Harvest Podcast for some BTS footage of our cinema production life.